All right, welcome. This is immigration and citizenship attorney Parviz Malakouti Fitzgerald, and this is our 16th mobility space this year. This is a series of mobility spaces. We're talking about issues in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and individual mobility. So today we're going to talk about passports without citizenship. And everybody knows, generally people commonly kind of refer to citizenship and passports interchangeably, but of course they're not the same thing, right? Passport is generally a travel document, legal ID, and sometimes rebuttable proof of citizenship in a particular country. But the vessel isn't the thing itself, right? And so, there exists this whole category of travel documents and passports that are issued by countries to their non-citizens, right? And there's not really I haven't found a great centralized repository of all of these things. But there are a few information sources that are really, really good and really informative. One of the first ones is a document from the European Union. It's called Travel Documents Issued by Third Countries and Territorial Entities. I linked that to the space here if anybody wants to look it up. But anyway, the bottom line is, it begs the question that if there are passports that are issued to non-citizens, how useful are they for somebody who's trying to be a global citizen, I guess, for lack of a better term, a person who wants to be able to move around as much as possible, to be able to basically, to not have single sovereign reliance, which is something that I talk about. And one of the main choke points of single sovereign reliance is issuance of a travel document, because generally speaking, the default is that you're kind of only entitled to request a passport from your country of citizenship. So obviously, if you're only a citizen of one country, and that country is unable or unwilling to issue you a passport for whatever reason, whether it be because you're targeted as a dissident or just because of incompetence or by the government or backlog or whatever, well, then obviously you're stuck, because in the modern nation state system, we rely generally on passports to be able to move around. Generally speaking, the default is you need passports to enter a controlled border. Now, there's obviously some deviances from from that default, right? There are travel unions. There are different types of borders between countries that are not completely controlled, or sometimes allow people to enter and exit countries with just ID cards. But the default generally for travel is a passport, right? To be able to pass a controlled border. So there's a lot of really interesting types of passports that are issued to non-citizens. A few that come to my mind off the top of my head is the entire category of refugee travel documents. These are also known as quote unquote Geneva passports. And these are passports that are issued by countries who are party to the Geneva Convention on Refugees and Statelessness, to people that are either stateless, so they don't have a country that's willing to issue them a passport, or they are refugees from a particular country, which typically means that either they're unable to issue a passport, to receive a passport from their country that they're claiming asylum from, or sometimes they can get the passport from the country that they're trying to claim asylum from, but doing so would possibly jeopardize their asylum claim in other countries, right? A lot of countries make it a condition of granting asylum that you not try to avail yourself of the benefits of the country you're claiming asylum from. And requesting a passport is sometimes looked upon as one way of trying to avail yourself of the benefit. So we have, of course, the Panama special passport, which is for the retiree visas. The UK, because of its history of colonialism and kind of tiered citizenship, has a whole variety of different types of passports that are issued to non-citizens. And I think we should clarify what we mean, or at least I should clarify what I mean when I say citizen or non-citizen, right? You can put a label on anything, right? That doesn't make the thing, comport to the label. I basically the rule of thumb I use is that the core element of citizenship is right of settlement, basically. Immediate, indefinite right of settlement. And so, if a country calls something a type of nationality or citizenship, but it doesn't offer that, I basically, as far as the way I look at it, I don't look at it as a citizenship, a full citizenship. So I just want to be clear that I'm defining my terms here. But we have a lot of these things that are kind of out in the in the yeah, in the world, basically. How useful are they? How useful are they? I have my own thoughts, but I don't want to, color the conversation too much by starting off. So let me start. Okay, we got Patrick here. I'm going to add Patrick as a speaker. We got Scott here. Then, of course, a lot of people listen anonymously. So let me kick off the conversation. Oh, and by the way, Scott, Patrick, anybody else who's listening, anybody can speak. So you just jump in. Don't feel like you have to be invited. If you want to speak, just send a request, and I will approve it right away. You can come in and say your piece. Okay, so let's kick off the discussion with a first question for Patrick. Okay, and it's going to be a kind of 40,000-foot question, Patrick. Generally speaking, for a person who's trying to become a multiple citizen, basically wants as much freedom as possible, what type of should they consider any type of position in their mobility portfolio for these passports without citizenships? And if so, how much importance do you think should be given to trying to pick up one of these along a person's journey in picking up citizenships and travel documents?
Yeah, fantastic question. I unfortunately missed the first part of the intro here. It was silent on my end, but uh, based on my understanding, I would argue that a passport without citizenship is a nice to have, but I don't think that it is something that one should necessarily strive for unless there's a very specific circumstance where it's beneficial. Um, and by that I mean, I think that so much of the benefits of a passport, of a travel document, comes from citizenship, that having a passport without citizenship is has limited uses. I mean, there are some benefits to some people, most certainly, but the chances that you're going to get a question or run into hurdles along the way, or that it solves a broad swath of mobility obstacles, I think is relatively limited. Um, I think they're very interesting, um, because a passport without citizenship is still better than nothing at all. But typically, the hurdles to acquire one of those are relatively significant. Um, and I can get more into details into specific examples, because I think in this scenario, it can be a little bit, 30,000 foot is good as a framework of understanding. But because the instances in which you have a passport without a citizenship are generally very specific situations, I think it might be better as this conversation advances to lean into examples, because they're going to highlight the the points you make a lot clearer.
Yeah, thanks. So if we look at this document, it's an Excel sheet, travel documents issued by third countries. It's the one that I mentioned in the intro. By the way, there's a link to this. Um, this is a fantastic document for showing the different types of travel documents issued by countries outside of the EU, both to citizens and non-citizens, and which countries within the EU will accept those as travel documents. And this is really enlightening. Most countries have like 5 to 12 entries of different types of travel documents that they issue. And then you have the United Kingdom, which I think is the king, I guess, pun intended, of issuing different types of travel documents to citizens, non-citizens, different types of nationals. And the United Kingdom has their standard passport at row number 2870, and their last document at 2907. That's 37 different types of travel document that are issued by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So just I won't read them all, but a few: standard passport, diplomatic passport, Crown Dependency variant British passport, Bailiwick of Guernsey. I jumped down here: British Overseas Territory passports, Anguilla, Bermuda, St. Helena, British Protected Person variant, British Subject variant. So some of these, the big problem, right, with these types of documents, and I think you kind of alluded to this, Patrick, is we don't know how useful they are. How useful they are is directly a function of what countries accept them, first of all, as valid travel documents, and then also what other type of access to a country the non-citizenship passport has to be paired with in order to gain entry, right? Because the ability to enter a country, whether it be as a tourist or as a temporary resident, permanent resident, or a citizen, is a function of citizenship, not passport. And that's something that I rail on and on about, like a broken record, right? It's really important to understand that that right of entry doesn't come from a passport; it becomes from a citizenship. Because once you decouple the citizenship and passport, you got to know, right, which one actually gives you the benefit to be able to enter, right? I guess I'd push back a little bit on what you mentioned or what you said, Patrick, regarding the utility, right? Even if you have one of these passports that doesn't have a citizenship attached, or let's call it a passport that's not evidence of a particular citizenship, um, even if you have zero visa-free access, that comes as a right of that passport, or zero settlement rights, basically, we still know that potentially that passport can offer three things, right? One is government issued ID, and we already know, Patrick, I think we both agree that that alone is an important benefit, right? We've spoken about that with regards to the Palau digital residency ID and other types of IDs. Secondly, a potential passport that you can get stamped on, okay, you can get a visa on in order to enter and travel and enter to another country, right? And I'll just give a quick example. So an Iranian woman basically flees Iran as a refugee. She applies for asylum in Australia, right? When she's in Australia, she falls in love with an American, right? That woman does not have a valid Iranian passport. Her passport's expired. She doesn't want to or is unable to to renew a passport from Iran. And now she wants to immigrate to the United States, basically to be with her U.S. spouse. So how does she do that? She's stuck in Australia. Well, she applies for a refugee travel document, okay, issued by Australia. It doesn't give visa-free access to the United States or necessarily any other places, but she can use that passport to go to her U.S. immigrant visa interview, okay, and if she's approved, get that visa stamped into that refugee travel document, and then travel to the United States. And that's a real example of a client that I had actually just a couple of years ago, right? So as the way I look at these documents is not so much that it expands your ability to travel anywhere or everywhere, but I kind of look at it as one last bulwark against being targeted by a country or having really detrimental reliance on a country, your country of citizenship, that doesn't allow you basically to kind of get out, to escape. In that instance, in that example of my former client, she was able to go from Australia to the United States. She can't really travel to many other places using that document, so it's not like she can gallivant around the globe. But she's able to basically make that move to be with her spouse, and then obviously take up residency in the United States, work towards naturalization eligibility, and then becoming a U.S. citizen and getting a U.S. passport, right? So for her and for people that are desperate, it could be a game changer. It could be a lifesaver. In that instance, right? This was a lady that was of childbearing age, okay, and she was under a lot of strain being separated from her spouse. So the ability to basically make that jump to come to the United States to join her spouse was really, really important, right? So for people that are dual citizens, triple citizens, quadruple citizens, right, I could see diminishing benefit, right, to assuming that you have all those citizenships that are all kind of in good stead and you have access to passports from all those countries. I see diminishing returns, right, on trying to pick up a passport without citizenship. But if you have zero citizenships or one citizenship or possibly two citizenships, but let's say one, the passport is inaccessible for one of those two citizenships, like let's say, for example, you're Ukrainian or Russian military age man outside of the country. Well, because those countries are trying to conscript their military age men, they're giving difficulty in renewing passports or even issuing vital documents. for those scenarios, equally, I think the passport without citizenship can be, a really, really important factor. So we got Drew in LA here. We got Digital Citizen here. Scott, you're Scottish, right? If I'm not mistaken, you have a Scottish flag in your profile. What do you think, Scott, about passports without citizenship?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm Scottish, so by citizenship, British, and I consider myself British as well. I'm not a separatist. Um, yeah, so well, just I'll go slightly off topic to start off with, but I'm actually in Albania at the moment, and first time I'm here, and just by an interesting aside is that this is the easiest entry to a country I've ever had was coming into Albania. They've got e-gates here in at Tirana Airport, and I just first ever time here, but I smoothly went through the e-gates, no queue, very quickly. So just an interesting aside there, and also a personal anecdote that not many people know this now, but 20 years ago I used to work at the passport office, the UK passport office in London, in Victoria, and I was there only there for just over a year, but I worked in the room where we physically put the information into the passports. So I was handling, I used to take big bricks of blank passports and put people's information into them once they'd been checked. But this I can remember the first time I ever heard of these different kinds of British passports, because I'd never heard of them before until one case came up, and that was a particular um, little small block of passports that was pulled out specially to do that job, and that was a whole new world to me because I'd never heard of anything other than a British standard passport. Uh, but yeah, it's an interesting, intriguing idea because it sort of separates the notion of citizenship and the travel document, of course. And for me, it's quite particularly interesting because it removes the patriotic element from a passport slash citizenship. If you're just using a travel document of a nation, then you're not necessarily buying into the whole flag waving or whatever that's sometimes required or expected of a new citizen. So it's interesting from that point of view. And I'm just thinking about the sort of, are there any citizenship by investment app angles, applications possible there? I mean, is there an opportunity for a country to sell, to by investment, a passport, but not citizenship, for a lower price, which then may, I mean, of course, you see the Caribbean countries at the moment are going through a lot of hassle with the extra requirements that are being placed on them. Is there some kind of angle there that can skirt around it? That's what I'm wondering. Thanks.
That's really interesting experience there from 20 years ago. Scott, about 2 years ago in 2023, I made a series of posts about the possibility of countries offering a passport for sale without citizenship. And I even put up a poll saying, what do you think is the value of such a thing, the market value? And I think I'd have to dig up the post, but I think the winning votes fell between $10,000 and $50,000. Yeah, I think there's a market for it. I definitely think there's a market for it. And we've touched on this topic lightly in our mobility space on digital residencies, talking about the possibility that maybe Palau or other countries that are kind of dabbling with the digital residency, because those digital residencies come with physical IDs, thinking that maybe those would be the jurisdictions that would be most likely to actually dip for the first time into trying to make this, this passport, the passport by investment, a true passport by investment, not a citizenship by investment that a lot of people refer to as a passport by investment. Bottom line is, I think there's absolutely no market for it. The key, obviously, is how universal would its acceptance be, right? If would countries, would third party countries start targeting that passport and say, no, we're not going to recognize that. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how difficult that would be. But for the $10,000 to $50,000 range for a passport without citizenship that can be stamped, that has a 10-year validity, and let's call it, I don't know, access. Let's call it acceptability by at least half the countries on Earth. Yeah, I think there would be a market for it. Definitely. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, in the meantime, I would say that I think it's a good idea. I would probably be in for it, depending on the country. It would be quite good fun, I think, just for it's a good pub story, if nothing else.
Scott, I was actually disconnected from my own space just a moment ago. Can you just repeat what you said, please?
Okay. Yeah, I said that I myself would be interested. I think it's quite, it's a good fun idea. It's it's a good story to tell in the pub, if nothing else. And there are certain countries where I'm that I like, that I'm sort of associated with, but there's no chance of me ever getting a passport from a citizenship from them, or next to no chance of that happening, because they don't really issue them. But if they issued these kind of quasi-affiliated travel documents, it'd be quite good fun, I think. But I think the big hurdle would be the third-party acceptance of them, because there's no, again, it would just, the EU would like even less than they like the citizenship, Caribbean pass citizenships now. They would like even less if it was cheaper. There's really no advantage from their perspective. Yeah, I think it would. It would have limited use. I'm sure you could use it in some areas, but it would not be valuable for the Western developed economies, I think.
Yeah, Scott. So just looking at the Excel sheet from the EU travel documents issued by third countries and territorial entities, just if I scroll down to St. Kitts and St. Lucia, for example, there's wide acceptance across the EU of the St. Kitts ordinary passport, diplomatic passport, official passport, but then you start getting into trouble with the refugee travel document and the stateless person's travel document. For the refugee travel document, only about 30% of the EU countries accept it. And then for the stateless person's travel document, there's only Spain accepting it, Hungary, and Switzerland, and all the other countries. I'm sorry, in the Schengen zone, all the other countries are rejecting it. So I don't know what the reason is for that, because stateless persons travel documents and refugee travel documents by other countries, for example, from the United States, are widely accepted across the EU. But that could possibly give a hint in maybe the EU being dissatisfied with some of the security features of those passports that are issued by St. Kitts to non-citizens. Keep in mind, we're talking just about the acceptance of the passport as travel document. We're not talking about visa-free access, right? And then if you go to St. Lucia, so ordinary passport, diplomatic passport, official passport accepted almost universally across these EU countries that are listed. And then there's something called a St. Lucia collective passport, and the refugee travel document, their stateless person travel document, almost universally rejected by the EU countries. So, I think, Scott, I think the question of acceptability by the EU would turn on the vetting and security features of such a passport, such a hypothetical passport by investment, right? There is an interest in, especially in the EU, with kind of, I think the way they kind of look at, trying to, give allowances or more grace basically to people that are, stateless or refugees or have, difficulties with their home country. I think that there would be an interest in recognizing documents, travel documents, that those people could purchase, right? Because, well, obviously $10,000 to $50,000, and I'm just pulling this number because that was from my poll 2 years ago. Obviously, while it's still a significant sum of money, it's still way short of what people are paying for even the cheapest citizenship by investment, right? Which is about the $130,000, $140,000 range. So I don't know. It would be an interesting question. And then let's say that there's a passport by investment and it's universally rejected by EU countries, but has, let's call it, middling acceptance outside of the EU, right? how much, what would be the value of such a thing? All right, we got Patrick back. You've been quiet. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, my issue is today I had issues connecting in the beginning, and then it booted me off twice so far. Apparently, I've been telling Grok the wrong things. Um, yeah, I think that would be uniquely interesting. But I want to take a step back, actually, if it's okay, because I was talking earlier about passports specifically, and I want to clarify the difference between a passport and a travel document. And I know it might seem a little bit like semantic argument, but I think generally something like an emergency issued passport, or refugee passport, uh, generally speaking, those are not, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not my area of expertise, but those are generally not regarded as passports, but they're regarded as travel documents. Am I correct in that?
Yes, yes, you are correct. I kind of lump them in together, basically. Even though, of course, there's different codes and different regulations that kind of reference specifically, validity of travel document or passport. Um, if you can use the thing, first off, if the thing is government issued or NGO issued, it identifies you, and you can use it for travel with permission from the destination via visa or something else. I kind of consider that I consider them to be in the same general category. But yeah, there is a distinction, and sometimes that distinction actually makes a difference.
Okay, got it. That changes my aperture a little bit. So, from my opening statement. Um, but specific to Scott's point about having a passport issued by a country in which you are not a citizen, there is an example of this that currently exists, and that's in the country of Panama, where you can get a passport issued that states that you are not a citizen, but it is a Panama issued Republic of Panama passport. Um, and it requires you to put a sufficient amount of money in their banking system. Um, and then you have to basically certify that it's there. Um, and it takes a while to assemble. It's not something you can do in a week. I think it takes 3 to 6 months, because usually most people find an attorney in Panama, deposit the funds. When you move funds into Panama, there's a lot of KYC that goes into that. Um, and I believe the threshold is $300,000. So for a lot of people, that price tag, even though you're not paying money, it's just you depositing money. Um, that threshold of just having that much in liquid capital, and if you're taking it from a place like the U.S. or the EU, and you're putting it in the banking system in Panama, that does throw some KYC flags. Up until recently, Panama was finally taken off um, a couple of those KYC lists, but it kind of gives you an idea of that enormous hurdle. Um, if you're moving money into Panama because you're doing a project there or a deal there, and you happen to get, oh, hey, I'm going to have this money parked here for this many months, I could get a passport without citizenship. That could be interesting, but to my knowledge, it's not something that is used hyper frequently. I would imagine that there are less than 1,000 of those a year. Um, but it kind of gives you an idea of that passport without citizenship.
Yeah, great point. I touched on the Panama special passport right at the intro, and I scrolled to Panama on this document. Anybody can look at this Excel sheet that I'm looking at. So these are travel documents issued by third countries, and of the 26 EU countries listed here, 17 of them accept the Panama special passport as a valid travel document. So France rejects it. Just to give you an idea, Czechia rejects it, and then it's tough. I don't have the legend in front of me. It's kind of tough for me to read the chart offhand because the countries are actually listed as abbreviations. and not actually written out. So yeah, that's an option, right? And it seems like at least in Europe, 17 out of 26. What is that? It's about 2/3, right? 2/3 of the country are accepting this as a valid travel document, and you could argue basically even that really the value, as vis-a-vis these European countries, is even more than 17 out of 26, because it's a borderless. The Schengen zone is a borderless zone, so if you use the special passport to enter Shenzhen through one of the countries that accepts it as a valid travel document, well, then once you're in, you're generally free to move around. So yeah, that's a great point. $300,000 bank deposit, right? So not necessarily costly, but definitely capital intensive, right? And I don't think I know anybody. If you're very interested to hear from somebody who has a special passport and has used it for travel. I don't think I know anybody who's used a special passport. But in theory, yeah, it seems like it's fairly well recognized.
Of course, it's more expensive than a Caribbean citizenship passport. Of course, in terms of the money that's being tied up, I know you're not paying for it, but it's the opportunity cost talking about there. More expensive.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We also have this category of passports without citizenship that are issued by international organizations and unions, right? So not necessarily by countries. So we've got the African Union, we've got passports, and again, I'm using the general meaning of passport, meaning including travel documents as well. We have passports issued by the Council of Europe. The EU issues a laissez-passer. The International Committee of the Red Cross, NATO. There are NATO passports. I think I tweeted about that, like tongue in cheek, about 2 months ago. The OEC, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, issues a laissez-passer, which is accepted by the majority of European countries. And then, of course, there's the famous or the infamous Malta passport, right? The Order of Malta passport, not the actual Maltese passport issued to a Maltese citizenship, right? So the Knights of Malta has a diplomatic passport that they issue, as well as a service passport. I know, I forgot as well. There's also the United Nations, right? Does anybody here know somebody who's had a passport issued by an international organization?
Yes, I know a few of them from my time in Washington, D.C. The World Bank and the IMF also issue official travel documents, which are look like passports. From my understanding, so I've seen people, not seen people, but I know people who have had them issued by the UN, the OAS, which is the Organization of American States, the World Bank, and then also the IMF. Those are two different multilateral organizations. Let's see, I think that's all of them that I've seen. But in any case, they have used them. They use them in travel for in their official capacity, right? You're being sent on a humanitarian issue. You're being sent to a conference or a summit. You see them a lot of them in New York during UNGA, which is the UN General Assembly meeting in the spring. And generally, people use them alongside their official passport or their diplomatic passport, um, which obviously carries a level of treatment not a lot, but a little bit different than an official passport, because they're not coming in a personal capacity. So um, it's someone who would be, your diplomatic passport affords you the ability to operate um, under in a diplomatic capacity, right? So, we all have the 1990s lethal gun interpretation of diplomatic immunity, but uh, that is not actually how it works. Uh, but you do have, when you are acting as a representative on behalf of a state or another country, um, you have certain privileges afforded to you, and that's what that diplomatic passport represents. But then when you combine that with a laissez-passer passport like those issued by the UN or the Organization of American States, it means it also signifies that you're there on behalf of one of the goals of that international organization. So, if you are going to a conflict zone on behalf of the UN, you might have that UN passport. If you are if you are a member operating on behalf of the United Nations, I'm sorry, not United Nations, EU out of Brussels, you might have an EU issued passport. And then also, more often than not, with the World Bank, you might see people actually on the ground using those in conjunction with uh, their passports. And then with the IMF, you generally aren't seeing them on the ground too much, except if they're going to summits or IMF negotiations. But I will add to it that the combination of those passports is unique, because if you have one issued by the UN, you might be a staffer, going to a humanitarian cause. And so you might not have a diplomatic passport from your home country. And so in that case, you're using your official passport from your home country and the UN passport. That's different if you are a diplomatic representative with your diplomatic passport and the same, UN laissez-passer passport. Similarly, so that you're working on the behest of a state and a multinational organization or multilateral organization. But if you work for someone like the World Bank, to my knowledge, most people at the World Bank, 99% of the people at the World Bank um, don't have diplomatic passports because they're not diplomats. They're working for a multilateral development organization, and so when they travel, they generally travel with their with a World Bank laissez-passer passport and their personal official passport. And so if you're someone who has like a ton of visa issues because the country that is your home country in which you have citizenship is, say, Pakistan, well, then that laissez-passer World Bank passport comes in handy. But if you're someone who has a portfolio of citizenship, say like an EU and a North American personal official passport, that laissez-passer, it might signify passport by the World Bank. It might signal you're on official duty, but it doesn't necessarily grant you any better access. And so they're really meant to be used in combination with other travel documents.
Great info. You know, when you separate the concept of citizenship and passport, which is how it should be, because they are two different things, right? And then you start talking about traveling on a passport. And again, we're using the general definition of passport. And I would basically mean that to mean a travel document that allows you, to enter a country, presuming you have access to the country, through some sort of status. When you do that, right, then obviously you end up with these different scenarios, these different hypothetical scenarios, um, where you're traveling with a passport issued by one country, but perhaps you're trying to avail yourself of a benefit in that country due to your citizenship in another country, right? And for some countries that you might try to travel to, this might work, and for some it's not going to. And so I have just two quick examples here. First, we have the ESTA program, so electronic travel authorization program for citizens of about 42 countries that can visit the country, visit the United States visa-free, right? For ESTA, to qualify for ESTA, you have to be a citizen of a country that's quote unquote a designated country in the US Code of Federal Regulations. But here's the thing, you have to have a passport also from that country of citizenship in order to qualify for ESTA. And the answer is yes, you do. I'm reading here from the Code of Federal Regulations, and I'll link this. It says, in addition to meeting all the requirements for the visa waiver program specified in Section 217 of the Act, each applicant must possess a valid, unexpired passport issued by a designated country and obtain a travel authorization via the electronic system for travel authorization as provided in Section 217.5. So the important part of that excerpt is, each applicant must possess a valid, unexpired passport issued by a designated country. So what that means is, if you're a citizen of France, for example, right, which is a designated country for ESTA, and you're trying to travel to the United States visa-free on ESTA as a French citizenship, but let's say, for example, you don't have a valid French visa. Let's say you're also an Algerian citizen, right? And you're trying to basically avail yourself of visa-free access to the United States on ESTA using the French citizenship and the Algerian passport. That's not going to fly. That type of mix and match is not going to work for visa-free access to the United States. So for visa-free access to the United States via the ESTA program, you have to enter with both citizenship of the designated country and a passport of the designated country, right? So that's one example, right? And then there's a counterexample, right? There's many counterexamples, but one is, there's limited freedom of movement within Mercosur, right? And I'm reading from my own article from MalakoutiLaw.com, and I'll post this because it has citations, right? Which I'm going to refer. Mercosur agreement, Mercosur CMC DEC N46/15, right? And it speaks to the ability of residents within Mercosur countries to travel passport free within Mercosur, okay? And I won't go through all the articles and the combination. That's in the article if you want to. But the upshot is that this Mercosur agreement says that if you're a resident and have an ID in a Mercosur member country, okay, that you can travel to another Mercosur member country without a passport if your country of nationality would allow you visa-free access. Okay, so this is an interesting scenario, counterexample to the ESTA example, because in this latter example, you can mix and match. You can match the travel document issued by a Mercosur country, okay, your Mercosur country of residence, not citizenship, with the visa-free access, okay, that you get from your nationality. Okay, so perfect example, let's say an American, like Americans and Canadians have pretty extensive visa-free access to member countries of Mercosur. If you're Canadian or an American, you go down there to Mercosur, you pick up residency in one of the countries, you get your cedula, okay, your ID, and then you want to travel visa-free, passport-free, okay, and visa-free to another Mercosur country. This agreement says basically that because you have visa-free access by virtue of your Canadian or U.S. citizenship, you can use your cedula, and there's actually an annex here that shows exactly the accepted documents by each of the Mercosur countries. You can use that document as a travel document in order to travel. Now, this is what the agreement says. I don't go as far as making the claim that in practice this always happens, right? We know that there's a difference between what an agreement, what a treaty might say or what a law says, and then what is actually practice on the ground. And oftentimes it's a super common scenario that CBP, let's call it border protection professionals in different countries, if they haven't seen a particular scenario, they oftentimes just err on the side of caution, which is to deny, say, no, that's not going to work. So I'm not saying that this flawlessly is implemented. I don't know. But in theory, this Mercosur agreement basically allows that type of mixing and matching, right? Your visa-free access given by one citizenship with your cedula issued as a resident of a Mercosur country. All right, we got Alex in the house. Alex, I'm making you a speaker right now. Jump in whenever you like. We got Drew, we got Digital Citizen. Digital Citizen, I've seen you around a bunch of times. Feel free to jump in if you have anything to say. Examples or counterexamples. Or if you think we're all wrong, that's totally fine too. If you feel that we're all wrong or we got something wrong, jump in. Open discussion.
Not sure it's relevant. Are you familiar with the story of one of the Gulf states? A few years ago, they did a block deal for. They had some residents of their nation, sort of nomadic tribes, I think, and but they didn't want to give them citizenship of the Gulf state. I can't remember which one, but they ended up doing a deal with the Comoros Islands. And that was for passports, but I think the Comoros Islands wouldn't give them residency, if I'm right.
Yeah, that was the UAE, and those were Bedoons, which I think in Arabic means without places, like Bedouins. I think that's where the word Bedouin comes from, because in Arabic and Persian, Bedoon means without place. Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I haven't dug deep, and I don't remember. To your point, I don't remember if it was just a passport or actually citizenship that they made the deal with. But let's look that up.
I'm pretty sure that the Comoros didn't want them to ever travel to the Comoros Islands. Pretty sure I'm right in saying that. So would that indicate it was just a passport?
Yeah, if that's the case, that would indicate it's just a travel document. Let's see here. Comoros government offered to sell passports to stateless individuals, including the Bedoon population in the UAE, in exchange for financial aid. Yeah, it sounds like you're right there, Scott, that it was just passports. Yeah, that's an interesting case, and I think 40,000 of them were issued, if I'm not mistaken. So there's got to be somebody out there that or some people out there that got these things floating around. I wonder if they're still valid.
Well, yeah, they must be. I mean, presumably they're renewable at the very least. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been much of a deal for the UAE, because they'd just be back to square one in terms of dealing with them. But there must be some utility, as the UAE sees it, for the Bedoon people to have these documents. I can't imagine that they're traveling too often in terms of cross border. So there must have been some within the UAE borders sort of value to them having it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're jumping kind of straight to the utility of a passport as a travel document, but people that are stateless, and a lot of Bedouins are stateless, before they even get to the issue of a travel document, they have big problems even proving their legal identity for just everyday life functions. And I've had some stateless clients before. I have actually an article on my website, which is an interview. It's a written interview, question and answer of a stateless guy living in the United States. And
I read that one.
You read that one, yeah. And so this goes to the issue of of kind of layered reliance on the state. Before you even get to a valid travel document, you need to be able to prove your identity, okay, to these entities, right? Your legal identity in order to get even to get the travel document. And in my experience dealing with, I mean, even the United States, okay, which is a huge destination, obviously, for immigrants, of all types from around the world. Even when you're filling out forms in the United States, DS-260, DS-160, it's really difficult to deal with somebody who's stateless. They don't even sometimes make like a field for somebody who's stateless. They force you to pick a country there. So that's another. I think that's an under discussed kind of element. Definitely, obviously, a benefit that's nested within a travel document that would be issued by a government, even if it's issued without, even if it's issued to non-citizens.
Yeah, I'll add in a quick little anecdote here about the stateless aspect. I've come across that a bunch in research. A lot of people in the late 70s who wanted to leave the Soviet Union. Part of how do I put this in few words? The Soviet Union did not like people who left the country. Um, so as a decentive for a non-incentive for leaving the country, they would say once you leave, your citizenship as a Soviet citizen is no longer recognized, and so you would essentially you had a lot of um, government organizations um, and um, once you leave the country, you are no longer a citizen, and they would have you issued a pari passu, I'm sorry, a laissez-passer document, and get you to the United States, and then all of the documents that were received here in the U.S. all say stateless on them, and so you do see that, and I think that I think what that means for an individual when they travel nowadays, being a stateless person is a little bit different than it was 40 to 50 years ago, but it does change your status in terms of both naturalization and your ability to like you can't it's against the UN Charter to essentially be a stateless person at this point.
Yeah, I would just I'll quibble with your statement there, and I know you just said it off cuff. It's against the UN Charter to make a person stateless, right? But meaning strip a person of citizenship if they have only one citizenship. But as a result of circumstance, unfortunately, a lot of people are born stateless. And then there's this kind of other adjacent scenario, which is a lot of people might not be legally stateless. They might actually have a legal claim to a citizenship, but the burden on them to be able to prove that is so difficult, okay, that they're not able to do so. And so as a result, practically speaking, they live their life as a stateless person. And in fact, I've had a couple clients like that, right? Which is where I've suspected that they have a legal claim to a citizenship, but it would just be so difficult for them to follow through with that, to get it, that either they don't do it or they feel like it's insurmountable, etc. I'd have to check the stats, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, at least 10 million people worldwide are stateless, which, granted, is a drop in the bucket compared to an 8 billion person population, but still pretty significant.
I think you posted something on similar about that, Parviz, a few hours ago, which I was going to reply to, about the child grooming suspects, or accused, who are refusing to go back to Pakistan because they don't have Pakistani citizenship anymore. But actually, there is sort of history of the UK stripping citizenship from someone in that situation. I don't know if you're familiar with the case of, I think her name's Shamima Begum. She was like a 14-year-old who decided one day to go to ISIS territory to become a bride. And in that, a few years later, the Home Secretary stripped her of British citizenship, even though she didn't have, I think, Pakistani citizenship. And she's sort of fallen between a rock and a hard place, or fallen between two stools, I should say, in that I don't think I'm not. The UK doesn't want her back, but equally, I'm not sure. Or maybe Bangladesh, either Pakistan or Bangladesh, isn't necessarily willing to take her either. So there's that.
Yeah, I posted about the Shamima Begum case, and I'm not sure because I haven't visited in a while, but I think she actually. So I know she's Bangladeshi. I'm pretty sure. I think she does have Bangladeshi citizenship. Actually, I just think she's not, gone through trying to get a passport or something. You know what? I don't want to speak out of turn. Let me check on that. Shamima Begum, was she actually? Because that makes a big difference, right? If she was stripped of British citizenship to zero citizenships versus just to Bangladeshi.
Well, I think the point was that she was entitled. She didn't have it, but she was entitled to have it. If I don't know if there's a distinction as you see it there, the Bangladeshi citizenship.
Yeah, so I do see it. I do see a. So here's the thing: a lot of people. I guess we'll get technical for a quick moment. A lot of people lump in being entitled to a citizenship with having been made a citizen by operation of law when they were born, but just not having actually gotten any documents. And they're not the same, really. They're not the same the way they're treated, right? The way birthright citizenship works is if you are a citizen at birth, it happens by operation of law. And what that means is automatically no documents required, okay? Nothing issued. You don't even have to know that it happened. The government doesn't even have to know it happens. If something happens, if somebody's given citizenship at birth, okay, it happens automatically. All the documentation that a person goes through to, register their birth, to apply for a passport, all that type of stuff. These are all proofs. Okay, this is all basically a way of getting proof of the thing that happened by operation of law. But technically, in the ether, in the universe, right? It happened, even if nobody. It's kind of like the tree falling in the forest, right? It happened, even if nobody saw it happen, even if nobody knows it happened. Technically, it happened. So when a person says entitled to citizenship, right? To me, that's kind of more reference to naturalization eligibility in a country, right? And that's one branch of citizenship by descent, right? You're making the claim, I have an ancestor that was a citizen of this country. I was not born automatically a citizen of the country, but I have eligibility, I have naturalization eligibility, okay, without a period of residency. Okay, so I'm applying to become a citizen of this country. And yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, some people think that it's not an important distinction. It is a very important distinction when you actually look at second and third wave consequences. Um, let's see here.
What
Can you guys see me?
happened? Yeah, what happened in the case of Italy when they reduced the citizenship by descent? What happened to those people that were citizens but no longer are?
You know, I don't know that, to be honest. I haven't been following the Italy situation that closely. Maybe somebody else, maybe Patrick knows. Patrick, you've been a little bit more on the Italy CBD news, right?
Yes. So people, to clarify, the question is what happened to people who already claimed citizenship by descent, or people who are looking to continue it on in the future?
Alex, you want to clarify your question?
Yeah, sure. I guess the question is, did those people, were they citizens and then they were stripped of citizenship, or were they never citizens to begin with?
No. Okay. So the legislation basically said if you're a citizen, you're a citizen, they can't be stripped. And so the legislation, well, it wasn't even legislation, it was a decree law that basically impacts the ability of people to claim citizenship here on out into the future and puts conditions upon the transfer of citizenship for people born abroad. And I can go into details if that's helpful, but no one was stripped of citizenship in that case.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to, I could bring up a topic here, and I think maybe it falls under this category. But can we?
Sorry, I was in an elevator there. So,
You're good. I was.
yeah, I about the Italian situation. I just haven't been following it close enough, but maybe that's something I should look into. Going back real quickly, Scott, to Shamima Begum. So it appears Bangladesh is claiming that she is not a citizen. So it sounds like it's a little bit of a hot potato situation, right? And this happens. We've seen this happen with high profile cases. I think a similar thing. Oh no, sorry. I was thinking about Bashar al-Assad, but that's a different scenario because they were, I think, refusing. The UK was refusing to issue her a passport. But we've seen this happen with high profile situations. Countries want to claim that a person is not a citizen of their country, and it's easier as far as the public perception goes to claim that if the person never actually went through the process of being recognized and getting a passport, etc. And seems like that's what's happened with Shamima Begum.
On what basis is Bangladesh saying that she's not a citizen? Or are they just pulling a fast one? Or is it just because they don't want her?
Okay, so jumping back to the idea of passport by investment, real passport
Did you
by
hear
investment.
someone asked a question? I don't know if maybe
Would
there's some audio issues.
who here would pay for that? Or actually, let's make it less personal. If such a thing was on the market, and let me define the terms, what do you think the market value would be? What do you think would be the sweet spot where a lot of people would go for it? And so what I'm referring to is basically government issued, sovereign backed passport, valid travel document, okay, without any citizenship. And let's say accepted as a valid travel document by 3/4 of the countries on Earth, so 75%. 10-year issuance. What do you think the market value would be currently of something like that? Alex?
I think I missed part of it. You said 10-year for which visa-free access?
75% of the countries of the world, I think it was the.
I think which country is more important than the total number, because most people want to go to the same 25 to 50 countries. But assuming it gave you access to Schengen, then I would, well, first I would step back. I would price this offering on a monthly or yearly basis rather than a 10-year basis. Partially because I don't think anyone can give 10-year guarantees at the moment in the state of the industry, given so much is changing with countries getting removed or added to visa-free access. So firstly, I would price this monthly, and in which case maybe a few thousand per month you can price it, and depending on which countries you get. So if you, I hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, I can now. I think there's some lag issues potentially as well.
Yep. Could you guys hear me?
I think the price would probably be somewhere around. I mean, it really depends, but I would guess somewhere in the low six digits, so 100,000 plus. Um, Essentially, the old price for Caribbean citizenship by investment, I think, would be probably closer to the clearing price. That gives you travel access without citizenship at a little over $10,000 a year. I think that probably sounds about right. Um, but it's very, it's impermanent, and so I think it has to be discounted a little bit compared to the CBI programs. Um, that's my guess, and I don't know a country that would necessarily issue one, but it would have to be a country that is willing that has the need for the money, but the political economy to not want to issue citizenship. And so I think there's it would, honestly, a lot of the Caribbean countries, I think that could be potentially interesting as a a tier B offering to a CBI program. Um, because then if you're not giving someone citizenship, then maybe it is a little bit easier potentially with Schengen access, because then you can go to Europe and say, I'm not issuing someone a passport for a citizenship for life. I'm giving them a travel document for 10 years. I think it's an interesting conversation that I'm not sure has been necessarily super considered in Brussels.
I have to step out now, but thanks very much. Very interesting discussion. Hope to see you all again.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, I wonder if the EU could use this as well. Was the EU ruling about citizenship or about passports? I believe it was about citizenship, right? That because Malta was not just selling Maltese citizenship, they were selling EU citizenship. Thus, the EU was able to regulate it. Maybe if they just sold a passport, that could be a potential workaround.
Yeah, the ECJ ruling was about citizenship and the greater concept of European Union citizenship. I don't see sales of citizenship-less passports impinged on by that, but I don't see the passport without citizenship as a workaround, because it's something else entirely, right? It doesn't give. I mean, the hypothetical I'm bringing up would not give right of entry or stay in the EU, which is really kind of the golden benefit, right? That makes citizenship in EU countries as valuable as it is. But yeah, I think you're onto something, Alex, especially because of the EU's concern with migrants in crisis and people that are from so-called third world countries and stateless people. Yeah, I could see a possibility where the EU is amenable to passport sales, not just by third countries, but by member countries as well.
And the Malta passport is a good passport outside of residency benefits that came with the citizenship. So I think if you're looking for Canadian access, Australian, US, that would be one of the few passports that you could buy that would have that, even if it didn't come with citizenship, and thus lack the EU citizenship rights. So that could be still a valuable product. And I think you missed what I was saying earlier, that I think your proposal of a 10-year passport isn't realistic, given how quickly things are changing, and better to have a monthly fee where you have it's like another subscription service. You subscribe to a passport, it gets you into a bunch of countries. They can also revoke it if you get any criminal background issues as well, and that would be more attractive. So everyone could feel that it's safer and less permanent.
To your first point, Alex, a passport issued without citizenship wouldn't give the person visa-free access to the US, Canada, and other countries, because visa-free access is a function of citizenship, actually. So we're talking about literally just a passport, which is legal ID, travel document, something that you could stamp. You can get stamped with a visa to gain access to a country, or in countries that have arrangements, where you can use the passport paired with benefits that you have from your citizenship. And I think the example the example that we were using, and I think it was before you joined, was Mercosur, the Mercosur agreement that basically says that residents of Mercosur countries can travel passport free, or not passport free. They can use cedulas and other documents to travel visa free, assuming the holder has a nationality that would give them visa free access. So we're talking about just passports, not benefits of citizenships here. And then about the monthly subscription fee, I mean, maybe something way in the future, maybe that could be a possibility. But ours, generally speaking, immigration offices and borders are not really they're not used to dealing with setups like that, like a monthly subscription thing. The standards are typically 5-year passports with a 5-year issuance, 10-year issuance. And, as with all bureaucratic processes, the more that one deviates from, what's the norm and what's accepted, the more friction there is. So, I wouldn't foreclose the possibility of a monthly passport type of program in the future, significantly in the future. But I'm skeptical that would work in any time in the near future.
Maybe annual. It makes more sense with the 6-month validity issues.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even think about that. Most countries, when you're entering on a passport, want at least 6-month validity on the passport for you to enter. So that's another issue. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, let's say even if you get under this hypothetical, you get a passport issued for 1 year. Let's say that very same day, by masterful planning, that very same day, you get stamped for a visa. But function that you may only be able to use that visa for 6 months instead of a year, because as we said, so many countries require at least 6 months remaining on validity. So I don't know. In the near future, I don't think that would be, and honestly, I think that'd be way less attractive for the market, to pay for a passport that only has 1 year validity. I would expect people to demand at least 5 years and ideally 10. But who knows? I guess it's all a function of price, right? I mean, if you make it cheap enough, right, and maybe some people would get the passport for just a year.
Just a thought. I think this fits into the conversation here now, and that is the idea of having two passports from the same citizenship. I know that there's kind of a program with the U.S. State Department where you can get a secondary passport issued if you can justify, and Parpers, you probably know this better than I do, where if you can justify as to why your your normal passport is going to be out of your control for a little while. Like, say it's in a long process of getting a visa, a visa for a very specific country to travel, or for, say, security reasons, if you frequently travel between countries that don't like each other's passport stamps. Um, does that fall into this category? Because then technically that second that's technically a passport with a citizenship. It's just an additional passport based on the same citizenship.
Yeah, what you said is exactly right. U.S. passport, second passport, 4-year validity for frequent travelers or people who are, don't have access to their first passport for a while for visa stamping. Those are valid reasons, as well as traveling, like you said, to two countries that are enemy countries. No, I would not consider that to be passport without citizenship, because it's still a passport that's issued to you as a citizen and based off of being a citizen, and it's still proof. It's still proof of citizenship, and it still lists the person's citizenship in the United States. So, no, I wouldn't consider that to be a passport divorced of from citizenship. I think it gives some of the same benefits that a passport without citizenship would give, right? Which is reliance on on your single sovereign, on your country being able to issue the passport. The second passport is still issued by the country, but when you have two, right, you can stagger the validity periods such that hypothetically, if the country that let's say it's the United States, right? Let's say the United States falls into another period of panic because of COVID or something else, and the passport offices are shut down or delayed, right? That's an instance of a country being unable or unwilling to issue you the passport. And if you had obviously the second passport issued by the United States for a validity period of 4 years, even though that was still issued by the same country and the same government, by virtue of the staggering of the validity periods, you've effectively insulated yourself from inability of that country to issue passports, right? Because you got that second passport during a time that they were issuing passports. So no, Patrick, I don't consider that passport without citizenship, but it does cover some of the same issues and benefits.
What about Taiwan? And I guess this would be a follow-up to your point that you need citizenship to get the travel benefits. So as I understand, most countries don't recognize Taiwan as a country. So even someplace like the Netherlands allows you to have Dutch passport and Taiwanese passport because they don't recognize Taiwanese citizenship as a citizenship because they don't recognize it as a full country. And so yet Taiwanese people, they have passports and they can travel to most places, including US, Europe, Canada, etc. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great example of a benefit of a passport without citizenship. And by the way, when you say without citizenship, I'm leaving off a really important component, which is without citizenship according to who, right? Alex, in your example, right? And I don't know this to be the case. I haven't looked into the Dutch recognition, non-recognition of Taiwan, but presuming what you said is true, and I think it is true, if the Netherlands doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, but Taiwan, their citizenship as a citizenship, but Taiwan does and other countries do, right? Well, then you have a scenario. It's like Schrödinger's citizenship, right? Some countries might recognize it, some don't. It's simultaneously a citizenship and not a citizenship at the same time. And for those scenarios, that's a great scenario. And we didn't even mention this yet. If you're a citizen of a country that prohibits dual citizenship, and you don't want to be as reliant on a single sovereign, right? Your only option may be, in order to get another travel document, to try to pursue a passport without a citizenship, right? So yeah, that's a great example. And in Taiwan's instance, right, it's there's mixed recognition, right? But let's take a passport that's issued by a country that no country thinks serves as evidence that the holder is a citizen of another country. That's still a benefit that, let's say here, the hypothetical Dutch citizen could obtain, right? To maintain their Dutch citizenship, not be under threat of having it be revoked, and still get another travel document that they can get, visas stamped on or use as legal ID and a valid travel document.
There are some Native American tribes that have tried to issue, and they're kind of nations. They have a very weird legal status. I think the technical term is dependent nation, where they're a country, but they don't have the traditional rights that countries have. And they've tried to issue passports, and there's been very limited success with traveling on them, but some people have occasionally traveled on them. Also, Liberland passports have been traveled on, but I think that requires citizenship. I'm not fully sure. Just two things to bring up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Liberland example. So 2 years ago, the Liberland founder, and yeah, that is supposed to be citizenship, right? Passport issued pursuant to citizenship of Liberland. But 2 years ago, the Liberland founder was posting on LinkedIn. I think I'm connected to him, or maybe I'm a second degree connection. That his country had been the Liberland passport had been traveled on and recognized. And I think he named, if I'm not mistaken, the Dominican Republic. And I thought that's great. But let's see the proof. Can we see the proof, right? And I responded that. David L'Esperance also responded the same. We kind of were both like, oh, great, can we see proof of this? And the Liberland founder never responded. I don't take his non-response to mean necessarily, oh, he had nothing to hide or that it didn't happen. Who knows? Maybe he was just too busy. But I'm skeptical, Alex, of those claims until I hear or see proof or hear proof from a non-interested person. Okay, from somebody who's not trying to promote, Liberland. And if that's the case, then yeah, that's fantastic. I would argue that such a passport doesn't fall under the purview of kind of today's discussion, but it's right adjacent, right? Passports issued by burgeoning countries, right, or micro nations, and obviously that's an potentially important component. Alex, do you know somebody personally that's not actually a diplomat of Liberland or the founder, somebody who doesn't have an interest in pumping up Liberland? Do you know anybody who actually has traveled on a Liberland passport successfully?
I don't know someone personally who's traveled on it, but I know people who've said they've traveled with someone who has done it, in particular in Mexico. And I've heard from multiple people that they've seen people use Liberland passports to cross borders in Latin America usually. So I think that it's possible to do. It's just kind of a luck thing where they have another passport. Most of the Liberland guys have EU passports. So first they'll try with their Liberland passport. And if it doesn't work, then they use their EU passport. But having crossed many land borders in Latin America, I totally believe that you can get through with a Liberland passport. If you try 100 times, maybe 2 to 5% of the time you can get through. And I mean, I've seen a border crossing where people just drive through on motorcycles without stopping because they live in the area and the border guards are just like, we're not going to chase them down. So I think it's definitely possible to cross in Latin American land borders, and I've heard people who've witnessed it, but I've not seen it myself.
Interesting. Yeah, I look, if you take a million attempted crossings, right? Let's just pick a round number, and you use different unusual passports, different unusual travel documents. I definitely believe that sometimes they're going to. The question, of course, on everybody's mind is that 3 times out of a million that it worked, or is it 300,000? Like 30% of the time it works, or is it 800,000? 80% of the time it works. And so, yeah, I would love. I mean, if there's enough people with that are doing this with interest, I would love people to start writing field reports and putting that information out there so that others can see that they actually on the ground bared the passport and got through. The other thing is, you touched on something, Alex, which is a dynamic at the land borders that's not really discussed that much, in my opinion, outside of the immigration lawyer community, which is like wave throughs, right? And the power of just showing a passport but not actually have it be scanned. The guys on the motorcycle that go through, right? Yeah, maybe sometimes they just drive through and they weren't supposed to, and the border officer doesn't pursue them because it's not worth it. But sometimes the border officers will just wave the person through. They know the person, okay, they've already admitted them 100 times, 500 times, and they just wave them through, right? And the person may or may not have a passport on them. If they have a passport on them, obviously nothing is being scanned. There's not close scrutiny being given to the passport. Wave throughs happen way more than people think they do. And they don't just happen in countries in second world or third world countries. They happen in land borders, even in first world countries as well too, and highly, technological countries. And I think it was the last mobility space. It was either the last one or the second to last one. And I don't know if you were here, Alex, for that part. I was talking about Quintanlan crossings in the United States. There's a whole subset of case law in the United States dealing with people who are applying for a green card from within the United States. It's called adjustment of status, that don't have proof that they entered the United States. They need proof of that. Generally, you need proof of entry with inspection in the United States in order to qualify for adjustment of status. And the reason they don't have proof of it is because they were waved through. And it's called a Quintanlan crossing because that's the name of a guy who had a case and he appealed it all the way up. And the upshot is that if you can prove to the USCIS officer that you presented yourself at a border and you were quote unquote waved through, okay, that qualifies under US immigration law as an entry with inspection, even though technically no passport was checked. And the important component is you showed up there, you presented yourself to a border officer. It's not your fault that they didn't look inside your passport and make a marking, make a stamp, or make some sort of recording of it in their own system, right? So you should be considered as having entered with inspection. And I would guess, jumping back to the Liberland passport or just the passport without citizenship, I would guess the first place is kind of the lowest hanging fruit where we would see successful crossings would be land crossings with locals that live in the community that cross so often that the border officers just know that they have the right to enter, and so they just wave them through. Those people trying to cross with a passport without citizenship or let's call it like a fledgling nation passport. Those I would guess, that would be a scenario which I would see kind of a person, or the passport getting its foot in the door, so to speak, as far as recognition by countries.
Well, again, you said you can't enter the U.S. visa-free unless you're a citizen. Is that what you were saying?
So for ESTA, there's different treatment given for the. So Canadians get different treatment. But for ESTA, you have to be both a citizen of what's called a designated country, okay? So one of the countries that has visa-free access to the United States via ESTA, and you have to bear a valid unexpired passport of a designated country as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking again to the Native Americans. Are you familiar with Jay's Treaty at all?
I'm sorry, the what treaty?
Jay's Treaty.
Not really, no. Go ahead.
So Jay's Treaty was signed with the US and Great Britain to allow Native Americans in North America to travel and trade freely throughout the continent. And after Canada ceased to be part of Great Britain, the US continued to recognize Canadian Indians as having this status. So it's something like if you're, and this part I think is of questionable legality, but historically, if you can show you're over 50% Native American and born in North America, you can cross into the US with this proof of your status under the Jay's Treaty. And you also have the right to live and work in the US as well using this status. But you don't necessarily have to have citizenship in Canada to have this status. You can, if you have this Indian status, you have the right to enter Canada without citizenship as well. So you could renounce your citizenship and then enter the US under Jay's Treaty without having Canadian citizenship. I complicated the scenario with the second part of not having Canadian citizenship. So maybe you want to pick the two apart separately.
Yeah, this is ringing a little bit of a bell. I'm recalling seeing a colleague, an immigration colleague of mine, talk about dealing with these types of cases and doing research. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, there's it's like treaties are like this overlapping, calcifying lattice, uh, and sometimes you have to dig down, right? And if you dig down and get really in the weeds, you start seeing all these really niche scenarios that um, that create benefits that are just little known or unknown because people haven't asserted the right or tried to assert the right and been public about it. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Would that be considered? You guys defined passports earlier, I assume. I think I missed that part. What was the definition, if there was one?
So for the purposes of this conversation and generally, I consider a passport a valid travel document that's issued by a sovereign or an NGO that is proof of legal ID, not necessarily including any type of mobility right inherent, like visa-free access, but basically being accepted as a valid document, a document to travel on by other countries. That's what I mean by passport, and that's why, of course, I distinguished the visa-free access given by Maltese citizenship earlier.
Okay, so this could be a scenario in which you already have passports without citizenship. Using your Native American issued document, you could travel across the border without necessarily even having.
I'd have to know more about the basis of this right created under the Jays Treaty, but it seems to me on first glance that this is based off of the person's status as being a member of a nation, right? A Native American nation. Is that more or less what it is, Alex? Can you get the thing without being a member of the nation?
It's actually based on blood. For the Canada doesn't recognize this treaty. It's only the U.S. that recognizes it. So, and it's based on blood, which I think is a little strange from equal protections clause, that you have to be 51% of this bloodline and then born in North America. So neither of those, I think, necessitates citizenship. You just need some kind of proof of your ancestry that you meet the blood quantum test, and then some identification as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that might. Again, I don't know enough about it to really have a strong opinion, but yeah, that might fall into this category, right, of passport/travel document without citizenship or nationality.
Yeah, maybe when we have a discussion on some of the more new state concepts like Liberland. There's a couple other kind of free state concepts. Maybe we also include travel documents issued by, for example, like Native American tribes, because I suspect, and I suspect this is true actually for Canada more so than the U.S., that as the political capital of those groups grows over time, their ability to issue their own travel documents, if not a passport, but some form of a travel document, will probably increase over time.
Yeah, absolutely. We should have a space on fledgling nation states, and I know Patrick is first in line, and I'm probably right behind him in trying to get a Slojamistan citizenship and passport. So yeah, we should talk about some of these fledgling nations. You know what? That might actually be a good topic for one of the very next mobility spaces that we have. You know what? Actually, I'm just thinking out loud here. Forgive me. So I'm all over the place. I think for that discussion, we'd probably want to have a founder, right? And I don't think I think they're probably accessible, right? We could have the conversation. Actually, let me ask you guys, would you like to have a mobility space first, just us discussing what's out there and not kind of have a founder in there, and then we could possibly do individual spaces with the founders of each one, and it could be a space specific on Liberland, a Liberland space, a Slowjamistan space, whatever. Or would you like to just throw it all in together and just try to see who we can get as far as founders are concerned, and just throw them all in together in one space? What do you think?
I actually like us discussing it first, just because some of them are very different, right? Like Liberland is a serious effort. Slow Jamistan, significantly less serious. Um, so I think, if we get a founder on, they're obviously gonna promote their cause, right? And there's a time and place for that. But I think just as a looking at the universe of options for fledgling nation states, I think it's probably good to have a discussion on our own first.
Yeah, I would agree. And I know some of these guys as well, being in the zone space, there's some overlap. I met the Mr. President of Liberland a couple times, and a few of their ambassadors and other officials. And also there's Sealand as well, off the coast of the UK. Yeah, so I think there could be a number of spaces talking to those guys, and they have some ideas on what could be used in terms of mobility as well. So that could be interesting to hear different.
Okay, yeah. So we'll do our own space discussing, and then we'll try to have one-offs, right, with each one of these guys, and we can kind of dial in and be more focused rather than trying to have more of a general conversation. Okay, cool. All right, it's 12. Where I'm at, it's 12:36 p.m. We've been going for an hour and 35 minutes. Before we start wrapping it up and giving an preview of what could be our next spaces topic, any last thoughts, or anybody want to bring up any last questions to discuss? Okay, cool. So this is our 16th mobility space. As a reminder, we're doing 50 mobility spaces this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, sovereignty, freedom of movement, and global mobility. So I put up a poll yesterday, okay, about what should be today's space, okay, and the options were passport without citizenship. That's the one that won. That's obviously why we spoke about this today. The next most popular one was springboard benefits. So just a space entirely dedicated to springboard benefits, right? And what I mean by springboard benefits is benefits that a citizenship gives you outside of that country of citizenship. That's why we use the springboard analogy. Third was CBI with residency requirements, right? And this is kind of a timely topic, right? Because we're seeing a lot of pressure on Caribbean CBIs, and they're responding in part to that pressure by discussing the idea of implementing residency requirements. And then the last one that I had here as an option was the power of a passport, right? And there's some overlap with today's discussion. What do you guys think? What should we discuss in our next mobility space, which will be this Monday? It could be one of these three remaining options that I mentioned, or something else, which I haven't mentioned yet. Patrick, you've been co-hosting a lot of these with me. What do you think? What would you like?
I think the springboard benefits is a good discussion, because I foresee that one being a long discussion, because there's so many different possible avenues. I know also we had on the board discussing the further direction of the EU, or the future direction of Mercosur, and some of these regional blocks. And I think maybe we time those to the period where there's an interest in that travel to that part of the world. So we looked at the future of the EU. Summer, everyone loves to gallivant across to Europe, but maybe some of the other regions we kind of consider relative to when people are going to be traveling there. So maybe not next week or the week after, but um, maybe in a few weeks we tackle some of those regions of the world, because we do focus a lot on Europe. And I think there's always that Latin American interest in terms of part of the world and travel access, and then Asia as well.
Alex, do you have any preference on what we do for our next mobility space?
I like the topic of residency for CBI, but I wonder if it's too early to do it. Because as far as I know, only St. Kitts has released their residency plans. So it might be good to wait until a few of the countries on the list release their plans, and then they can be compared. So I like that topic. Springboard could be interesting as an alternative then, or some of the stuff Patrick was saying as well. I think I'm generally interested in almost everything, so I don't have a strong
Yeah,
preference.
good point about the timeliness for residency requirements. And I think you just convinced me to hold off on that for now. As a side note, as we're talking here, I'm having some of my tweets liked by Ramesh Ganahariti, and he's an academic that focuses on citizenship and passports in Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Trans Eritrea. And I'm realizing late I probably should have invited him to this mobility space, but we can have him definitely on whatever future mobility space we have on the topic of new nations. So that'll be good. We'll definitely get him in here to talk. Okay, anybody else? So anybody else have an opinion? Digital, do you have any preference on what we choose for our next mobility space? Drew in LA. We also have Face Alex. If anybody has a preference, speak up. Otherwise, I'll take into consideration what Alex and Patrick said. I'll probably put up another poll just because it seems like we didn't solidly land on what we think that the next mobility space discussion should be. But I'll give a little bit more preference to what Patrick and Alex said.
Maybe I add also some kind of Aboriginal mobility rights. I think could be a good topic because many Aboriginal people have some kind of extra mobility rights. And I think most people don't know about that, and it may be an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic. I think for that one, I think I'd have to have somebody in here that that's kind of an expert on that, because I don't deal that often, if ever, with that issue. So I'd probably have to have somebody in here, a strong co-host who can take the lead on that. But yeah, I'm definitely going to mark that down as a mobility topic to have. Okay, great. So thank you everybody for joining. Just as a reminder, this was the 16th mobility space. We're doing 50 this year. We do them Mondays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Typically, sometimes we deviate a little bit in order to accommodate a guest that's going to be speaking a lot. But join us. It's a totally open discussion format. Anybody can speak. And yeah, that's it. These are not yet on podcast platforms, but it's coming soon. I will upload these as well as all back episodes on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and a couple other major platforms. Thanks, everybody, including anonymous listeners. Take care.